There's a question that feels more urgent than ever these days. What is education really for? And we're going to find a surprisingly modern answer by looking way back, about 800 years actually, to a thinker who basically built a framework for understanding, well, everything. But seriously, let's just stop and think about that for a second. What is the fundamental point of all this schooling? Is it about getting a good job? Is it to make us good citizens? Or is it just to cram our heads full of facts? It seems like everyone has a totally different answer, and that conflict, that confusion, is right at the heart of our entire educational system today. I mean, you can see this tension everywhere. On one side, you have these incredibly influential thinkers like John Dewey. He argued that school is basically about preparing us for life in society, to solve problems together and participate in a democracy. But then on the other side, you have someone like E.D. Hirsch, who says the main job of education is to pass down a shared body of knowledge, what he famously called cultural literacy, so that we all have a common foundation to communicate. Both of those sound pretty reasonable, don't they? But they point our schools in very, very different directions. So to try and get a handle on this modern mess, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a big step back, and I mean way back, to the 13th century, and a thinker who created this all-encompassing system for making sense of the world, Thomas Aquinas. It turns out his ideas might just give us the very framework we've been missing. Okay, so let's start right where Aquinas begins. Because before you can even begin to talk about education, or honestly anything else, you first have to understand his idea of law. For him, law wasn't just a set of rules, it was this orderly, rational blueprint for all of reality. And he saw this blueprint as a clear hierarchy. Right at the very top, we've got the eternal law. Think of this as God's master plan, right? The divine reason that governs the entire universe. Then, just below that, is the natural law. Now, this isn't a written rule book. It's our ability as thinking, rational beings to tap into and understand a piece of that eternal plan. And only then at the bottom do you get to human law, the specific rules we make for our societies. And for Aquinas, these laws are only legit if they're built on the foundation of the natural law above them. And on this point, Aquinas was a huge fan of quoting the philosopher Augustine. What Augustine is really getting at here is that our laws, the ones we write down, aren't just things we invent out of thin air. For them to be truly just, they have to be anchored in something higher, something eternal. They have to be discovered, not just made up. So this is maybe the most important takeaway about natural law. It is not a list of do's and don'ts. It's an orientation. It's about having our human reason pointed in the right direction towards what is good. It's this built-in capacity we all have to figure out the basics of right and wrong, simply because we are rational creatures. And Aquinas gives us this great analogy to make it all click. He says, look, if you have a chief governor with a master plan, then all the junior managers under him have to make sure their own little plans are derived from that big one. It's just common sense. Well, in this analogy, God is the chief governor, and all our human rulers are the junior managers. All just government has to flow from that single, rational source. All right, so we've got this incredible blueprint for how society should work. But, right? A blueprint is just paper. It's useless without someone wise enough to actually read it and apply it correctly. And that brings us to the one virtue that is absolutely essential for any good leader. And that virtue is prudence, or prudentia in Latin. Now, when we hear the word prudence, we usually just think of being cautious or playing it safe. But for Aquinas, it was so much more than that. Prudence is practical wisdom. It's the master virtue that lets a person see what is truly good in a messy, real-life situation, and then, this is the key part, choose the right way to make it happen. It's wisdom in action. And what's really interesting is that Aquinas doesn't think prudence is this one-size-fits-all thing. He actually breaks it down based on its scope. So there's personal prudence, which is all about governing yourself. Then there's domestic prudence for running a household or a family. And then at the highest level, you have political prudence, which is all about achieving the common good for an entire community. And this right here, this is a total game changer. Aquinas is absolutely clear on this point. If someone is really clever at managing their own private affairs, but couldn't care less about the community, they are not truly prudent. For him, real wisdom, true prudence, has to be aimed at the good of the whole. It's a fundamentally social and political virtue. So you take that idea, and you get to the absolute peak of this virtue, what he calls regnative prudence. This is that special, most complete form of practical wisdom that a true ruler needs. And why is it so special? Because their scope is the widest, their responsibilities are the greatest, and their goal, the common good of everyone, is the most important of all. Okay, so we've talked about law, and we've talked about the virtue of prudence. What in the world does any of this have to do with what kids learn in school? Well, for Aquinas, this whole philosophy isn't just some abstract idea. It leads directly to a very specific vision for what a curriculum should look like. And this is what it produced, the medieval liberal arts curriculum. It was neatly organized into two main parts. First, you had the trivium, which was all about language and how to use it. You'd study grammar to understand its structure, logic to learn how to reason correctly, and rhetoric to communicate persuasively. Then you moved on to the quadrivium, which was focused on numbers and the mathematical order of the world through arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the name itself, Artes Liberalis, tells you everything you need to know. It literally means the arts befitting a free person. The point of this whole system was not job training. It wasn't about teaching you a trade. The goal was to form a person's rational mind and their moral character so they could live a truly full human life. The point was to make you free, not just to help you make a living. So let's tie this all together. Let's bring this ancient wisdom right back to that modern question we started with. How does this vision, this idea of an education for freedom, help us with our modern debate? Let's do a little thought experiment. If Thomas Aquinas could time travel to today and listen in on our debate between the Dewey camp and the Hirsch camp, what would he think? Well, he'd probably find something to agree with on both sides, but ultimately he'd challenge both of them. He'd likely look at Dewey and say, education can't just be about social problem solving. Its highest purpose is to form the human soul. And then he'd turn to Hirsch and say, a head full of cultural facts is worthless or even dangerous if it isn't paired with moral formation. Otherwise, you're just producing clever people, not good people. And that right there is the absolute heart of it all. For Aquinas and for his great predecessor Aristotle, the ultimate goal of education isn't just stuffing our heads with knowledge or giving us a set of skills. It's not about what you can do or even what you know. It's about who you become. The whole point is the formation of character. Which really leaves us with a final question to think about, not just for our schools, but for each of us personally. Is the education we're getting or giving one that's aimed at freedom and virtue, or is it for something else? At the end of the day, is the goal to build wisdom, or is it just to build a resume?